Hi, I'm Steve from Nearly Wild, and today I'm here with...
I'm Chris Terry. I'm the project manager on Hoveton Great Broad restoration project working for Natural England.
Wow, Hoveton Great Broad Restoration. Now, we've known each other for a little while now, Chris, and I'm really interested actually by how you got to where you are in a way, because you've obviously got an interest in nature and the natural world. You obviously like getting out and about.
Yep.
I don't think that's quite where you started out, is it?
No.
And you've ended up working on a really quite complex nature recovery project. So maybe park that for a minute and just where did all this come from?
Wow, yeah. So quite a journey. So you're right. I mean, my working role for the last 21 years, I've been in education and teaching, and the last 12 of those have been senior leadership, and the last 4 as a head teacher. So very, very different background, but very stressy, very kind of full on all the time. But that sort of love of nature, I think, had always been there. So, and funny enough, of why it's Norfolk as well is very odd because, I grew up in Surrey. We holidayed in Norfolk every year, holidayed on the Norfolk Broads every year, which was very odd. Both my parents worked for British Airways. We could have gone anywhere in the world. We chose to come to Norfolk every year for our holidays, boating on the Broads or camping or whatever. So there was always a real interest of here. And funny enough, both my brother and I ended up gravitating this way laterally in our lives. And mum and dad retired this way. So it was kind of, there was definitely a pull and a hold that kind of pulled us this way. I think there was always that kind of interest in the natural world that kind of was just bubbling away under the surface there. But I pursued a career in education and was great. But sadly, around 2012, both my parents got quite ill. I ended up having to sort of look after them. And in 2017, I took the option actually of just stopping work and just being a full-time carer. And not only for that practical point of view, but actually I just needed a break to reassess kind of where my career was going and what I was doing. So during that time off, it was then a case of, right, what do I really want to do with my career, with my life? And I was actually working with a career consultancy in London.
Right.
Who, we talked through a lot of what are my motivations, what are the things that really get me up in the morning. And I realised I didn't want to be a desk job anymore. I wanted to get out. I wanted to be out and about. But also using my kind of people skills, my business skills that I developed and honed over particularly in the last 12 years. And this job came up in Natural England. And I thought, well, first of all, who are Natural England?
Right.
Because actually,
that's interesting.
I just never heard of them, And it was like, so a bit of Googling, found out, did a bit of research into what the project was about, thought this sounded really interesting. So applied for the job. Then was offered it. March 2019, I began in the job. I kind of picked up the team, inherited it. It was kind of mid-transition, mid-phase delivery of the project. And as you may know, it's a massive one, £4.5 million project funded by 2 big external funding organisations, so a huge amount of work. And just loved it. But I think come June, July time of 2019, I suddenly realised, this is like putting on a big pair of slippers or a big comfy coat. This just felt right. It felt like the right balance of what I wanted to do, of being practical, of being desk-based, of getting the team, of kind of dealing with stakeholders, but actually also having practical. And I think it was that kind of desire to be able to, do something that really would have an impact for generations to come. Not in a kudos way that's got my name anywhere on it. I'm not interested in that, but it was about, that you just know you were going to restore something that was going to be the benefit for a lot of people for the future. And I then suddenly found that there was this massive gap in my knowledge base. Although I knew kind of the practicalities of project management and everything else, there was lots of the drivers around what the conservation laws were, what were the HABS regs actually all about, what were some of the European legislations that we were working on, what are some of the bird directives that we were having to sort of deal with. And while I'm relying on people in my team with those skills, I wanted to have that knowledge and know it. So I was very fortunate with my team. Scott Hardy, who's my science officer, loved just imparting knowledge. So I was like a sponge, just soaking up kind of what actually was going on here and what it was all about. Yeah. So I then and then lockdown happened, and that was a great time really to just sit and immerse myself and learn, which is what I spent a lot of that time where we couldn't get out and do things in doing that. So Yeah, it's been a huge learning curve, but it's been, so for me personally, it's been a huge learning curve. I think it's also been great to practically just see how I can take the skills I've got from another career and turn that into skills that can be used in this career. And even in the engagement work, all that work in actually what makes for good learning, what makes for good, actually engaging kids, was so important for a lot of the engagement work that we were doing as well, because it just works between adults, children, whatever. So there was so much transferable, and I think that's been actually another great learning thing. It's actually realising that you can, I would say 40, 48 and a half, you can change career and just decide, actually, there is this whole world you can get into and step into. And the environment, career world it's great. There's a lot of people in here that have done that. I was amazed how many ex-teachers there are working in the education world. It was just incredible how many people coming into it from second careers. But yeah, so that was kind of in a brief possible bit of some of my history.
It's really interesting. But something I was talking with somebody else who's been involved with the Hoveton project, which is about restoration of a broad, and trying to get the ecology back working again, isn't it, really? And nature restoration is a phrase that gets used. And he's very much from the sort of traditional ecology side of things. But one of the things that we talked a little bit about is this: how important is it to be passionate about nature or the natural world? How much of a piece of that jigsaw is it that makes it all work?
So, I mean, it's interesting. I think you'd asked me that question as I began this. I'd probably had a different answer. I think now, 3 and a bit years in, I think, because you do develop that passion and and it rubs off. It's kind of just bounces off everybody. They have that passion. Everyone's very passionate about what they do in natural England. It's one of the things that drives people, I think. And without that, I think it would have been very easy, particularly with some of the issues that the project's faced, to have just thought, there's probably an easier way of earning some money at the end of the day, But actually what drives you is just that passion, because this is what's right. And when you talk with other specialists in the organisation around some of the issues, some of the kind of the technicalities of what we've been doing, and you just hear how passionate they are, you just think, this actually is important, and we've got to do this because it's what's right. And I think is also, you don't realise, unless you're in this world, just how urgent some of these things are becoming. People talk in a very almost sort of blasé, it's not going to affect me way about climate change or about sort of what the impacts of man can be on the environment. And until you get into it and you really see it, you just don't realise just how urgent a lot of that actually becomes. And so you've got to have that passion to make it happen, because otherwise it's not going to. And so, I think I very quickly, got into that space and then realised, blimey, these things are really important. And I think that's it's certainly what's driven the team. I think, is that sort of passion to know what they're doing is right. But also that sense of urgency, it's not something that can wait around. It's something that's got to happen now. Because you just, you notice just how much, for example, in the winter weather, how much water rising on the trail is now. It was only a little bit 2019. Now, there's a couple of months of the year we're under. How much that's impacting, how much we've got to replace the boardwalks every year. Just practical things like that. But we've increased footfall on the trail by 8% in the last sort of 2-3 years on the trot. But that actually has a knock-on effect to the fact we've got to replace bits on the bird hide every year now, not every 2 years, because the footfall's greater. So the weight of people in the bird hide pushing down, and all these things, you think, oh, blimey, that's actually the practicalities. But so it's that fine line between, bringing people into, our special place, if you like, with the trail. But you need that so that you get the message out so people understand what's going on and can see what you're doing, So it's a very fine line we've got to tread in conservation.
There's something I'm quite interested. I mean, obviously you come out from having originally started out in the education sort of world, which is pretty complex in its own right. I mean, it's a lot, dealing with people and young people particularly learning and all the kind of different ways that people learn and so on. But I think often people think of project management as something very structured, that you can kind of see a series of steps, you can set things in place and on you go. And one of the conversations I've had quite a lot with people is the difference between complicated and complex. And the fact that within ecological systems, and particularly ecological systems where we see people very much as part of it, it's incredibly complex. So you're trying to manage a sort of process of change through something that's constantly changing itself, and where the parameters aren't necessarily even staying the same. How have you found that traditional project management fits with that, or do you think that you probably weren't necessarily a traditional project manager in the first place?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, so I think the biggest thing I think you have to do is that flexibility. I think is kind of the key word, which I think is where when you're if you sit and do your project management qualifications, I think it's that being able to respond to change. It's having those decision gates in a project plan where you think, okay, what's happening? Do we need to reassess things? And having that sort of flexibility around it. That's sort of so important, and having the structures that will do that. But I think what's important is to make sure you've got the systems that will support you with it, because what you don't want to do is be able to, suddenly be, knee-jerk reactions to things, and then actually the systems take time then to work around it, particularly working in a public sector organisation where it takes time to affect a purchasing change or a procurement issue or whatever else. You can get, and probably historically the project has got into some issues where, on procurement, where people have made quick decisions, changed something and not actually thought through all the processes. So I think providing you've got the structures and the systems in place, which is why I think the project management structures are so important to hold on to. You need that to be able to have the framework by which you can make those changes, but you have to relate back to those. So have your change management processes there, have all those in place so that you've got the support. But you do need to be flexible and have those ability to be able to react to the things that are happening and going on. But to be evidence-based as well, I think is important, not just to suddenly go with, because people are very passionate, and you've got to also, not think, okay, we've got to do this quick, let's change ship and do something different. I think you've got to actually have the evidence that's basing it, make sure you're doing the right thing for the right reasons. Because once you start down a route, it's difficult then to change it, and you've got to be able to, think where people have so many different opinions about things as well, to be able to know, no, we're doing this for the right reasons. These are the reasons why we're doing it. And to be able to separate the empathy, the emotional at times from the factual of what's got to be there. Because sometimes you're making decisions that aren't going to be popular. And so, you've got to have that kind of factual basis behind it. So I think there's a place for that sort of formal approach, but I think you have got to be flexible. You have got to be prepared to accept change and to be able to do that, but being mindful not to just do it as a knee jerk or kind of what you think should be happening. I think you've got to have those structures, and that's where I think particularly the classic Prince 2 or the APM structures are quite useful to be able to stick to. I think some of the bits probably you can sort of, I suppose, just not say pick and choose, but you can kind of you cut your cloth according to kind of what's needed, because sometimes what you also don't want is something that becomes overcomplicated. But I think those structures are there, they're proven, it's useful to use them.
It's really interesting. I mean, I think obviously there may be people who are watching this who are thinking, I'd like to know a lot more about this, and particularly some of that adaptability and how does it work? How do you have structure with adaptability? It feels like they're almost two different things, but they need to be both together. So, I mean, obviously that's something that we can talk more about if it's of interest. But I had a couple of other kind of bigger questions for you, I suppose, then taking forward. And the first one is, in the time in this job, or even it's sort of more broadly, what for you have been the kind of big success points for the natural world or for wildlife? What are the points at which you've said, do you know what, I really feel like we're moving somewhere? It might just simply be that you say, well, I've finally got a job in it. I don't know, but
So I think we in 2019 we began on the project. It was 50 years that the trail had been opened. So the trail that is aligned to the project was found by Dr. Martin George, who obviously the trail had always been there, but it was a case of, wow, this has really got to get open to the public, and kind of sent the idea of getting it open.
And this is a walking trail on a boardwalk.
That's right, yes, walking trail boardwalk. It's sort of adjacent to Hoveton Great Broad, and it's really the best way of being able to all see. So Hoveton's a private broad Broad. So from the viewing point, say, you could get to actually see from where it is. And so we embarked on the plan to have 50 events for the 50th anniversary. And in the end, it actually ended up at 65 events in the end, because we just got, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do it. And I think it was the number of people, of those, I'd say, I don't know how many, I don't know, off the top of my head, say 25, were probably based in the city of Norwich and kind of in a city sort of urban area. And the number of people who lived in Norfolk who said, I've never been to the Hoveton Great Broad Nature Trail, or I've never been on the Norfolk Broads, or we've passed through Wroxham very quickly as we accelerated through to get to the coast or something. That just people that are living in this local area, just on the doorstep, don't know the jewel that's here and just don't appreciate sort of what's there. And I think unlocking that for people, I think, was one of the great ones. So we did a competition in connection with the Watermills and Marshes project that Broads Authority run, and the prize was to have a seat. We hired a 54-seater coach, and there were 54 places that were the prizes, and we went out on the coach up to Broads Tours in Wroxham, got on one of their pleasure boats, went up to Wroxham, Selhouse Broad, got off the trail, went up a little bit further towards Horning, turned around, came back. It was a lovely day out. Just the looks on people's faces and the comments people were saying of, I never knew this was here. Isn't this beautiful? Gosh, moving at 4 miles an hour, appreciating nature. For those 54 people went away, and hopefully it unlocked a promise in them that they were going to come back, get on the bus, come back here, get to Selhouse again and enjoy it again. So I think that for me was one of the bigger wins, and just realising that, in a simple way, you can just get to unlock that. So I think that was kind of one thing. We did a lot of work too with a lot of refugees and asylum seekers through the English Plus charity.
Yep.
And again, for them, it was just giving them something that, they come to a new country, learn a new language, new customs, new ways of doing things. All of a sudden, nature's that universal thing. It's like music, isn't it? It's the language everyone understands. It's the language everyone can, understand the piece you'll get from a tree or bird song or whatever. And for them to be able to come out and just get that peace and that bit of switch off time and feeling safe. And just the simplest things like, the project has a budget for this sort of thing. So to be able to buy them a pair of wellies and an outdoor coat that they can come out and be out here was great. And the fact that so many of them volunteered to come back and be, support, to do some conservation work at Selhouse or on the trail or wherever else. And they came back and come back 3 or 4 times to do that voluntary work, is great. So I think sort of those things are kind of come with some of those that sort of stand at work. I think from a conservation point of view, one of the big things we did was this sediment removal. So 54,000 cubic metres of sediment sort of pumped out from the bottom of the Broad. 54,000 cubic metres.
Wow.
Yeah, okay. So there's a lot. Yeah. And working with a Dutch company called Netix, who came up with this idea of in geotextile bags, pumping the sediment into that to create these new fen areas. And it was great. Netix, quite innovative idea. They've won some international awards for the idea. They're now actually off the coast of Japan, almost building a mini city using a similar process of stuff.
So let me get this straight. They basically take mud, put it in bags, and build new bits of land out of the bags.
Absolutely, right. Yeah, absolutely. And the land, and it's strong enough to, it's a couple of, I think it was about a year or so before we could walk on it, but after that, then you could walk on it, and it is now, and just seeing what that has now. What it now does. We transplanted some fen turf from the nearby Woodbaswick marshes onto it, so it kind of gave it a bit of a kickstart to grow. But we've got some fantastic growth of stuff that's just rocketed off, and I think probably a little bit faster even than some people even thought might actually happen. Yeah. So that's just been a real physical win you can see, and you'd think, and just seeing that so many places now, people are in things are nesting in there, and it's home to a lot of wildlife. Thinking, this was a great win. So I think there's been some scientific wins, there's been some engagement wins that. Sometimes people necessarily, wouldn't always have thought, we might get as quickly as we have done. And then hopefully we're going to now start seeing, the plant recovery happening, which is what we wanted to see from getting the depth of the water now it's a common depth across the whole broad of 1.5 meters. We're now, hopefully that's going to start seeing some plant growth. We'll start getting the water quality back again. Which is just sort of so exciting just to see that happening and just seeing that sort of process.
Very much. Well, see, that word passion's coming up into my head again now as you're talking. Yeah. It's really nice to see. So I've got one final question for you, and that is, for somebody who's sort of thinking they'd like to get more involved in working with wildlife or doing this type of thing, they may be like yourself, sort of been working in something else for some period of time. What would do you have any piece of advice or thought that you'd like to share with those sort of people?
So I think, I hadn't realised just how much voluntary work there is in the sector and how much it's so needed. And so, if you're thinking about it, look at, trying to find some areas where you could volunteer. You get out, it starts getting to know people. It also gets you to think, is this the sort of thing I want to be doing? So actually that's a useful way in. National Trust crying out for them, Norfolk Wildlife Trust locally, RSPB, Natural England, we're always on the lookout for people. So from a practical point of view, I think, that's one area. But I think also, there's so many places that need trustees, that need people on trusteeships, on groups that are looking to look after things, sort of, broad society. Again, in places like Warray Yacht Charter Trust, always looking for people. Norfolk Wildlife Trust. If you've got business skills, that type of they'll bite your arm off to get those people involved. And I think all of those things, are always ways of getting in, and then thinking, okay, how can I use my skills? How can I use what I've got now to turn it into something else? So they're just practical ways in which we can start getting into it. It's good to really work.
Brilliant. Well, I've really enjoyed that, having a chat with you, Chris, and nice to get some of those insights as well.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Steve. It's good to know.
Much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully next time out on the Broad.
Indeed. It'll be good to see and come out to see what's happening on the trail.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Steve. Brilliant.